Welcome to the Dirty Side of Leadership podcast with Ron and Kristin, where leadership meets entertainment. This podcast features stories with names and certain aspects that have been changed to keep submissions private. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Dirty Side of Leadership podcast. Are you breaking a cardinal rule of interviewing? In today's episode, we break down 4 topics to avoid in your next interview and surefire interview tips to land your dream job. Ron, I took your great interview course, Interview Skills to Land Your Dream Job, and I really enjoyed your scruffy look. I was thinking to myself, this is a guy who just retired from having to clean shave every morning, and you were virtually flipping the bird to the razor. Am I right?
You are so right. That was right after I retired. So I grew a little beard. By the way, I don't think you've paid me yet for the program, but
yeah.
I'm sure.
Add it onto my.
I'm sure
add it
you
to
will.
the list.
So, Kristin, I've got some exciting. Since we're talking about a topic I am so passionate about, as you know, I was so passionate. I did that online course. That for the next 7 days, I'm going to leave the course free. And this is a payoff because I'm not announcing it anywhere else. I'm not posting on social media. So if people listen to the podcast, all they have to do is log into our website, forwardoperations.com with a 4. Go to the interview course, log in. It's going to be free, 25 minutes. And I'm telling you, Kristin, if parents are listening, they should sit down and take this with their child because there's a system that we'll talk about. But if you do it with someone, it's way more beneficial, and it's really cool. I've had some great responses. Yeah,
I really enjoyed the scenarios that you run through. And I also felt that it, like you're saying, it really is. These are some, you go into the details, but these are some basic skills that it's really important for people to have from the get-go. And so even if you have a 15-year-old, 16-year-old they're just going to be going and interviewing to work at, say, Ace Hardware, right? These are great interview skills for any age.
I tell people all the time, an interview is another notch in your belt. Whether you get the job or not, you're building experience, you're developing your courage, you're becoming more articulate. It's a great experience. Kristin, I've got something funny. You're going to like this little phrase. I used to tell people what are the famous last words of someone about to interview. I'll wing it. I don't know how many times I talked to a guy not long ago, told me he was going to interview, and I wasn't going to beg him to help him. Right. But I just said, are you sure you're ready? I've got a few tips that might help you. I'm just going to wing it. So I was like, go wing it, bud. Go wing it.
That is so bad. I'm assuming he did not get the job?
He did not get the job.
There you go.
Kristin, how come if we are in sports, we know you have to practice. If you're in a test, you study. Life is all about, you growing and developing and practicing and getting better. And for some reason, everyone thinks that they can just go in and haphazardly answer these questions. It doesn't work that way.
Right. No, it doesn't. And that's interviewing. And I know a lot of jobs now, they have basically, it's almost like a skill evaluation and a personality evaluation. You actually have to put some thought into that because those are pretty intense. And I've heard people tell me that they have failed those and then they cannot reapply for 6 months. So those are not just for fun. They are actually going to weed you out if your answers are not what they're looking for. But you need to be honest with your answers.
Yeah, the online course does go into 2 of those. If you were a fruit, what kind would you be? Which you've answered for me before.
Yes.
And if you were a color or something, I can't remember, an animal.
Right.
But they're looking to see how your thought process works. Are you quick on your feet? Can you think? But yeah, interviews are getting more extensive, but then I've had other companies that have watered things down because they're so desperate for employees. So,
right. Sad times.
It's a unique time. Time.
It really is.
So, Kristin, as we go in, I've seen this many times as well that can happen is people really sabotage themselves because they say terrible things about their current job. You think you're getting sympathy, but unfortunately, you're letting them know that you're one of those people that criticizes your company. Yeah. What's your thoughts on that?
Oh, well, it's interesting because when I was taking your training, I started thinking about that. And I was interviewing for a new bank job. and it was a lateral transfer, so going from branch manager for one bank to another. And I was asked in great detail about my current role. And it was interesting because the person interviewing me was like, oh my goodness, that is making my head spin. Because this was a national bank versus a regional, and the sales expectations were greater, and just your hourly responsibilities were tracked. So even though the person interviewing me was like, oh my goodness, I can't even imagine having to do that every day, when she would ask if I was ready for a change, or basically kind of laid it out there that it didn't sound like this was an enjoyable position or place to work, I did not fall into that trap. I repeatedly said, I am welcome to change. I am excited for a new opportunity. I never said anything negative. I didn't fall into it and be like, oh, right? I just don't even know how I've been doing this for the last 7 years. I didn't fall into it. I stayed laser focused on not saying a single negative thing, instead talking about how excited I was for the opportunity.
That's a great answer. In all honesty, if you look at it categorically, people are putting you into a psychologically positive category or psychologically negative, whether they even realize it or not. But no one wants a complainer. No one wants someone with a negative attitude. There's nothing worse than that. And sometimes, I know an interview isn't, the most important thing, but it's very important because with the right questions, and if they're structured correctly, you can find out really someone's philosophy. I remember two of my favorite questions that I would ask, and especially if it's an internal candidate and I knew they were disgruntled, I would say, how would your current supervisor describe you? How would your colleagues describe you? And then I would also say something like, when you work on a team, how would the team describe you? Things like that. And the people who were negative, you should see them squirming to answer that question.
Right.
There should be nothing to hide, but there certainly was in that instance.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've talked about oversharing in previous episodes. And though I'm a big advocate of transparency, there has to be parameters with what you say, especially when interviewing. So a great example is number 15 in your 50 most commonly asked interview questions in your training. When asked, why are you leaving your current job? Do not say anything in the realm of, well, I'm going through a divorce and really looking for a fresh start, or I don't make enough money. I'm really struggling to pay my bills with my current salary. Though they may both be true, that is too much information. And by saying something like that, you will lead the interviewer to question if your personal life will affect your job performance.
Oh, that is so true. That should marry over when you become employed. There's people share too much, even when they're employed. But yes, you got to have structure. You got to have boundaries, and no one wants to know everything about you. There are certain parameters that we have to operate in the work world. It's just the reality. I'll tell you something that I did one time, though. I had a huge interview. This was the Academy interview, and I was in a federal building. There was a group of people. I tried to get some alone time, but because I had been an instructor at the Academy, a lot of the people in that federal building knew me. So I couldn't even get time away, and all of a sudden they call my name, and I walk in, and I literally said to them, now this is when you can use a little bit of personal information in a good way. I said, hey, my 11-year-old daughter ran me through a sample interview at the library on Saturday, and she said that I looked away too much, and a couple of times that I was repetitive. I said, so I promised her I would report back, so if you guys could let me know how I do at the end of this, I'd appreciate it.
Oh my gosh.
It got a great laugh, and because it was so tense when I walked in the room. And I made that very brief. Now keep in mind, I do want our listeners to know this, I knew the interview panel. So I did not walk in strangers, because in that federal system, they had either come to the academy. One was my boss in D.C., so I knew everyone. So I threw that in kind of quickly and chuckled, and everyone in the room chuckled, and it helped me relax so much.
Yes.
It was beneficial.
That's perfect. I love that. Hey, I was smiling while you were telling the story.
Okay, this is important. And I was telling Kristin that probably one of the things that I've heard most from companies and was contacted recently by hospital administration is employee retention. Now, think about that as we discuss this part. You have to be very careful when you're interviewing not to say, I just want to get my foot in the door.
Yes.
Or this is part of my career path. You're on this path, you're moving. Or I literally had someone, I'm not making this up, shortly after I got promoted, actually ask how old I was because you time out with the federal law enforcement, wanted to know how old I was. And when I told her my age, she went, dang, I wanted your job.
Oh, wow.
I was like,
awkward.
oh my gosh. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Anyway.
Yeah. So it's very important that we don't lead on to the fact that this may be a foot in the door. That may be our objective, but keep that to yourself. If you want to get in, don't let them know that you're only planning to do a year, sometimes less. I've hired someone and they fooled me because I hired them thinking I'd have at least 2 years. And within 6 months, they were applying out for the next position. That's very frustrating for a hiring manager, especially when you're hiring a higher position.
You know it is, Kristin, but I tell managers all the time, you got to have plan B, C, D, because...
It's true. You need a bench.
You really do. And I had someone call me and frantic, like, I hired this person. They've been here 8 months. They're taking another job. And I said, that's just something you got to factor in. Any formula you're doing, any strategic plan, people are going to leave. It's just the way the world works.
Right. Well, that's why, I talked about this in an earlier episode. When, as a leader, you need to have your bench, and it needs to consist of worker bees and then those who would be your replacement. You don't want to just have people that want to work their way up the ladder. You need people that are okay being the worker bee for a couple years. If not, they never want to be in leadership. You need a nice balance. Because if you just hire the person that's climbing the ladder, you're going to have a revolving door. And I know from someone I've promoted a lot of people, it can be very frustrating, especially when you don't plan your team right and you have an entire team full of people climbing the ladder. You have a revolving door, and then it looks bad when you have turnover. So you need to watch out for that attrition. You can control that within reason, but like Ron's saying, you have to have a bench. I want to talk about something else we didn't mention. I just want to get your opinion on what about during an interview if somebody says, ultimately, I'd like to start my own business. Is that a no-no?
Well, that shows you there's an exit strategy. They're going to have other interests, and that would not bode well for me, even if it's true.
Yeah, there's been mixed reviews on that because some people are like, well, growth mindset, but then the other people are like, no, that shows, like, to your point, short term.
Well, I think they're going to be, that tells me they're going to be distracted. Now, if I've hired them and at some point we start talking, they say, hey, I've got the entrepreneurial spirit, then, we can talk about it. But that's right. I think that's not something you say on the interview, but I get it. Opinions vary.
Yeah, they sure do. So in episode 23, we discussed career changes and how you can feel a little insecure for a few years in your new field while you're acclimating to the new environment, new terminology, everything that goes along with it. You want to avoid leading onto insecurities. This is like during the interview. If you say something, say you are interviewing in a new field, you don't want to say something like, well, I'm not very well versed in this industry, but you don't want to go there at all. You want to lean heavily on your transferable skills. So maybe you're a great communicator. Maybe you're a collaborative leader. So you want to lean on that and not talk about your deficit, because that also you're planting seeds of doubt in the mind of the folks who are interviewing you.
No, there's not much I can add to that. You got to be very, very careful. I tell people to just say, hey, I'm a quick start. I'm willing to learn anything, because they ask you a point blank question and you don't know the answer. You can't fake that. So you have to say, I don't have an answer on that, but I guarantee you as soon as I'm hired, I will learn everything there is about this position.
Right.
You know, you always want to end in a positive, even when you're talking about strengths and weaknesses.
Right. I like that.
Yeah.
So I know that you and I have both had a lot of people ask us whether or not it's appropriate to decline providing current salary when asked. I was researching this. There's a lot going back and forth on this topic out there. So I'm curious, Ron, what are your thoughts on if who you're interviewing with is asking you what you currently make, doesn't that give them a vantage point to then lowball you?
Yeah, I don't want to make this an infomercial, but I provided 3 tips on salary negotiation in the interview program. And that is specifically one that I cover. If they ask you, here's what you have to decide. If you decline to offer that, you have a full right to do that, but it may not bode well. It may not look good. So the way I tell people to answer that is you list your salary, but say, I do not believe that salary accurately reflects the value that I bring to the company. And I'm hoping that this new position will provide me an opportunity to, earn a higher salary.
Right. I like that. I've also read some people say, if you provide me your budget for this role, I can tell you whether or not it's within basically something I can accept as a salary. What do you think on that?
I don't know if you got that from watching the video, but that's number 2 is I say, can you please provide me with the salary of a comparable position as this one?
Yes,
and
yes.
that puts it back on them. And then if they come back and they've said a lot more, then you've won the victory.
Right, right. Okay, so I want to ask your opinion on this. You're going to have a lot more experience with this than I have. I want to know what your thoughts are on when it's appropriate to share a disability or medical illness. We're not talking about pregnancy. You don't have to disclose that you're pregnant in an interview. That's completely separate and protected. But if somebody has an illness or a disability, does that need to be provided during the interview?
Yeah, as you know, there's a lot covered in the American Disabilities Act, ADA right. It's called. Mm-hmm. You do not have to disclose things like that, but if you need accommodations, for example, let's say you're dyslexic and you need an accommodation to take an exam, then you certainly want to make sure that you've evened the playing field for yourself. Now, an employer, once they have an agreement to hire you, once they've signed on the dotted line, then they can ask you about accommodations. They still shouldn't be specific. Right. I would encourage people that it's better, and it seems to me that people are way more receptive to disabilities than they used to be. You know, as you can imagine, all the slurs and things that were used 60s, 70s, and people were made fun of. I think the climate is much better, and I think you're going to look very honest. And if you're having to take an aptitude test or something else that could harm you in the interview, you certainly want to disclose that, I think.
Right, right. Yeah, I appreciate that feedback. So now that we've talked about what you want to avoid diving into during the interview, let's talk about Ron's specialty, landing your dream job. So when arriving at your interview or for your interview, be on time or between 10 and 15 minutes early. It's okay to be 10 or 15 minutes early, Ron. I've had people show up an hour early.
I have too.
I'll be honest, I actually found it awkward and slightly annoying. If you are going to be there that early, wait in your car, please. Don't sit in the lobby and stare at the person who's going to be interviewing you for 45 minutes.
Kristin, I have to throw this in. We had someone show up so early, we thought the interview times got messed up.
Oh my
so
gosh.
We buy some time and we're going through, like, checking the times. We thought we screwed up, and the person, no, they're supposed to be like 9 o'clock. So one of the branch chiefs had to literally leave the interview room, walk this person down to the break room, and basically say, we'll come and get you. That was awkward. Don't arrive an hour early.
No, don't. It's so irritating. I remember I've had multiple people do that, and it's in a branch. So you're sitting in the lobby where customers are at, and I'm just trying to get my morning coffee without the awkwardness. But sometimes I've just been like, screw it. We're just going to start the interview early, and so we did. But anyways, don't be too early. That's annoying. It's also greet everyone with a smile and initiate a handshake. I think you and I may differ on this. Even though we're coming off of a pandemic, I still say to initiate a handshake. If they decline, that's on their end. At least you weren't the one that didn't put your hand out in the first place. What are your thoughts on that, Ron?
Yeah, I don't have strong feelings about that. I know that I've had people walk in a conference room and you just can't shake hands with everyone around the conference table and you just have to wave. But usually the person coming to get you, they're going to give you the signs of a handshake. I always think it's positive. You're right. We went through this awkward phase coming out of the pandemic. I don't have strong feelings on that, but I do think it's going to be very awkward if you reach your hand out and they don't reciprocate. But yeah. I don't think that's going to make or break. I don't think that's going to make or break.
I've had that happen to me, but it was, I went on a buy trip with my mom. She used to be a buyer, and where they're buying clothing for a large retailer. And we were at Furrier, which is fur coats. Anyhow, this is New York City. I went to shake hands with the man I was introduced to, and he was a Hasidic Jew. I didn't know you're not allowed to shake hands. But that is the most, even though I did nothing wrong, I just didn't know. That is the most awkward feeling. And you feel this sense of rejection, even though it is what it is. You didn't do anything.
It left you hanging.
Wrong. Yeah. I was just like, that is the most awkward. But it's better to do it than to not. I had someone during the pandemic, they wanted to do a chest bump instead. I'm just joking. I thought I'd throw you. Yeah. Well, I know. I was like, everyone was fist bumping, so I thought I would just take you off balance there for a minute. But definitely a lot of fist bumping going on, a lot of elbow to elbow going on. But I think we're past all of that. And so go for the handshake. If they deny you, that's on them. Also, dress the part. It's better that you're overdressed than underdressed. And if you're wearing a suit, please make sure it fits. There's nothing worse than an ill-fitting suit. It's too big or too small and the buttons are screaming. You got to make sure it fits. It's or even if you have to...
Or you have your tie that stops about right here.
Oh my gosh, Ron's pointing to like his clavicle.
I did work with someone who actually did kind of have a belly, and the tie stopped at the top of the belly.
Oh, never good. It's better to pull a Trump where it's just like hanging down like to your knees.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness gracious. Yeah. So let's just make sure. I always tell people, like, if you've recently experienced weight loss, for instance, and your suit is just hanging on you, it's better to go, if you can't afford a new suit, go to a used, you can even go to Goodwill or somewhere that has secondhand stuff, and you can find something that fits you. That is better than wearing a suit that just hangs on you.
Yeah. And
so I'm curious, Ron, right before, so you're there, you've made a good impression, and you're just about to start, your heart rate skyrockets. Mm-hmm. If you're wired like me, your heart rate skyrockets. What should people do?
Well, let me repeat one thing. People who practice are going to be more relaxed in that moment because they've done this over and over. They know the script. But this is something that we teach in federal law enforcement. This can be applied to any part of your life. When you can train the brain, as you and I have said before, the amygdala houses our emotions. And what you do is you take a deep breath. Now, I do some 4-7-8. You breathe in 4 seconds, hold it 7, breathe out 8. It's relaxation. But what you're doing when you take a deep breath is you're telling your brain it's time to relax. It can hesitate blood flow. What happens is when we get nervous, that blood flows and you lose your fine motor skills. You can get auditory exclusion, we call it. You can't hear. That's why people can't hardly, when they've been in an accident, it happens in slow motion sometimes. All these things happen, even if it's in a milder form. Right. But if you start now, you don't want to take a deep breath on the day of the interview. Start now. You take some deep breaths. You relax. You're telling your brain this means chill out. And then when you do it, I'm not saying you won't be a little bit nervous, but you will be a lot more relaxed if you begin to work breathing. And you can do it very discreetly. We call it a grounding. You're grounding yourself, a grounding breath.
Right.
And right before we would do scenarios, if a law enforcement officer had to draw their weapon, it's not like you see on TV. In real life, they're usually a nervous wreck because they're coming out of that fight or flight.
Right.
And I don't want to get too deep into this, but we would have them take a second grounding breath. Once they're safe, they've holstered their weapon, then you take another grounding breath, and it helps them recall details, helps them relax.
Okay.
So the same concept can work with interviewing or giving a speech or anything else.
Yeah. Yeah. I told you recently when I have 2 speaking engagements coming up, and I did one about a month ago, and as confident as I am, and as much as I knew my material, my heart rate started jumping, and I started feeling almost like I was going to pass out, because then all of a sudden my heart rate goes really slow, and I was like, no, not here, not now. So it is important to remember these things, because can make a huge difference. And then I know you're big on positive affirmations, like people can be talking themselves up in the car as they're driving to the interview.
So a little more brain knowledge. The prefrontal cortex, it gets alerted to fear. And our brain is designed to protect us. Nothing else, nothing more. That brain, from a child's hungry, they cry. It's designed to get what we need and to protect us. So if your brain is thinking something negative, or there's a threat, or I may fail, all these things run through the brain because it's trying to protect you. That's why we have to reprogram ourselves. And we do that by visualizing a positive outcome. This interview is going to go so well. I'm going to do well. I've practiced. I'm prepared. I'm confident. I've been planning for this my whole life. So when you do that, you get that positive. Your brain starts to believe you, believe it or not. It'll start to believe you that it's going to go well. So the grounded breath, visualize a positive outcome. This is going to go well, and you go for it.
Yes. My 9-year-old son, I have been a hypochondriac, like just on the spectrum, I would say, of a hypochondriac my whole life. I just think it's in my DNA. My dad's one. And now my 9-year-old son is exhibiting some of those behaviors. So I make him, right when he comes to me, say he's, I don't know, swallowed hot tub water, and he's like, oh, he knows there's chlorine in it and the chemicals, and so he'll be like, am I okay? So I make him do positive affirmations. I am healthy. I am okay. I will be just fine. I make him do stuff like that, because you literally can trick your brain. Your brain is literally hearing you. It's funny. Some people say the brain is dumb. It goes by what you hear. So it's true. The positive affirmations go very far, and I suggest them for any age range to really start utilizing that, and don't feel silly about it. Okay. Ron, I know that you talk about some nervous habits where people pick like lint off their clothes during the interview.
Nose, yeah.
Can you imagine if they like reached over and picked lint off of the person interviewing them? Yeah. They're like, excuse me, you have a hair or something. But why is it important to try to ditch those nervous habits?
They're distracting. And I remember when I used to teach an instructor development course, we would have people make a presentation. I had one guy had change in his pocket, and he's shaking the change, and no one was paying attention. I've seen people play with pens in an interview, but it is funny that there's imaginary lint that appears. They become a lint picker. They're just doing this stuff. So the nerves.
I've seen that.
Yeah, the nerves make us do so many crazy things that you're better off as you practice. I want to repeat that again. You perfect what you practice. You walk in and you've practiced, you set your hands down on the table. And that avoids all this other stuff.
Yeah. Okay. I want to ask you, this is a personal question. I talk with my hands. I don't know if you saw that video I posted on Instagram recently. My mom was videoing me. It was like concert in the park night in the park near our house. And I had run into some folks I knew at the park, and my mom thought it was so funny because my hands, I was using them violently almost. And she was recording me talking to them. And I watched the playback, and I was like, oh my gosh, you would think I was Italian from New York. I mean, it was insane. And so I thought it was hysterical. And it made me think about when I would interact with clients. Once in a while, the client, I would watch them watch my hands. And that's when I knew, oof, you're distracting them, because they're literally watching your hands. Do you think someone talking with their hands can become distracting to the person interviewing them? Should they sit on their hands? Should they minimize or just rock it?
Kristin, one of my newest things I teach in communication, you know, I go into body language, voice inflection, tonation. It is, and this, I use some funny things, but it's called baton gestures. If you think of a conductor, they have a baton, right?
Yeah.
Your baton gestures, your hand movement should flow with whatever you're telling, because there's some people, they just can't help it. You mentioned Italians. I have an Italian friend, but you never want to be spastic. You don't want people to get uncomfortable, or you don't want it to match. You're saying, well, he went over there, and then you point a second later or whatever.
Right.
So, yes, we should learn to control that, especially most people aren't as bad when they're sitting, by the way.
Oh, okay.
And I think it was where someone else was holding the phone for you. But your baton gestures should always align with the story and the movement and not make people uncomfortable. If you're practicing for an interview, though, I would practice with my hands on the table.
Okay, that makes sense. I know there was one moment where I held my heart with both hands while I was talking. I was like, what was I even talking about? Clearly, I felt very passionate about the topic. So, yeah, I think that is really good feedback, because I was distracted watching myself, I can tell you that. I really enjoyed learning more about transition words and sentences in your training. I had not necessarily ran through that before. So can you share really what that is and what that sounds like?
Kristin, I have to tell you, the reason you hadn't run through that before is I developed it. It was one of my breakthrough moments. That is what got me. I started, for some reason, practicing that way. Then I helped one person. They came back and they had improved so much that I helped someone else. So then I started developing a system. That was the key.
I love it.
Transition words are something that prompt you to change direction. So if you're talking about college, and maybe you want to make a point that you worked your way through college. As you know, I got my bachelor's degree, but I worked at a restaurant, or I was a server during all 4 years of college. When you say 4 years of college, I know I'm finished with college. I'm going to transition to my first job. So you might say, you know, my first job was driving a truck, and this is what I learned from that. And you have another transition word. So after I learned to change a tire, I got a promotion. When you say promotion, you're going to another job. You learn key words, and on the video, I do a live coaching session, and the young lady on the video, she developed, we had one meeting before, then she developed her transition words. She comes in, and you can hear it, and that was unrehearsed. She nailed it. So, but here's the key, Kristin, is when you practice transition words, you think, okay, I'm going to be great if they ask me why I'm the best candidate for this position. You think, I've got it memorized, I've got my transition words. But what happens is you build a cadence. So when they ask you a question you don't even know, you're still going to stay in your timing. Usually most interview answers should be around 90 seconds. You shouldn't just go on unless it's a very complex job or something you're explaining. So you will stick with that 90 seconds, and your brain will remind you, time to change gears, time to go in a new direction. Kristin, you want to practice it once?
Oh my goodness, yes. I hope I don't sound like an imbecile. Let's do it.
I love putting you on the spot. This is unrehearsed, folks, so whatever you get, you get.
It literally is.
If people are watching on YouTube and Rumble, watch her hands. I want to see if she...
Well, the thing is, you know what keeps my hands down here is I will hit the mic, and then everyone will hear that. Yeah. So the mic keeps my hands from going out of control.
You know, Kristin, if people only knew, we may have to put it together. There's a blooper reel on this podcast for sure. We've had a few mic drops and a lot of other things.
Oh, yeah.
So we're going to make it simple, though, and short, because we don't want to run too long on a podcast. So all I want you to do is, you went to college, right?
I did.
I'm playing with you. Okay, so think about, did you work or do anything in college? Anything stand out?
Yes, I worked for the bank while I was in college.
Okay, so I want you to start off. Your opening word is going to be, I'm a really hard worker. While I was in college, I worked at the bank, and then just list something. What did you do at the bank? Were you a teller?
Yeah, teller.
Okay, so as a bank teller, when you say teller, I want you to switch to your next job. What is your next job?
Banker.
You were a banker. Mm-hmm. And what did you do? What is there a couple highlights, 3 or 4 highlights you mentioned as a banker?
Yeah. Well, I was always achieving my sales goals, working with clients, building relationships.
Okay, that's perfect. And then that may be enough, or you may want to go to another job. But I'm just saying, let's just practice those two, because I want our listeners to get this idea and understand it. And, of course, purchase my program. So here's what we're going to do. Now, what's your opening? Your opening word is going to be, I work. Okay, that's fine, in college. But you could say, I've always been a hard worker. I think that's a great lead in. And then your transition word is when you get to, as a teller, right, you're going to transition to you becoming a banker.
Okay.
So you're going to start off with, I was a hard worker. You ready for this?
Okay, ready.
Tell us a little about your work experience.
Well, have always been a hard worker. I went to college, and while I was going to college, I worked at a bank as a bank teller and was highly achieving sales goals and won many awards. And so from that position, I was promoted into the banker role, where I was able to expand my knowledge of banking and work one-on-one with clients to help them achieve their financial goals. And I also did this while meeting my sales goals in that role.
Okay, let me interject. So actually, teller ended up not being your transition word. It was sales goals. That's okay.
Can you tell what my specialty was?
Yeah, no one gets it the first time, and that's why we go back and start over. So when we go back, we decide, okay, you're going to start off, you're a really hard worker, but you were descriptive, which I didn't know a bank teller had sales goals. But
oh yeah.
So you decide to be descriptive about your bank teller position. And so let's come up. So I always met my sales goals, and I don't remember what else you said. Something else.
I won awards.
I won awards. Okay, so awards, let that be your transition to, did you have another job after that, right? You were a banker?
Yeah, branch manager. Oh, got it. Teller, banker, branch manager. Okay.
So those are your key points. And then your transition word, when you say won awards, then you're going to say, I was promoted to manager, or whatever you decide to say.
I see. Okay.
Let's try it one more time, just for our listeners and just for my fun, my pleasure.
Let's see. Yeah, he likes to torture me.
Kristin, tell us a little bit about your work experience.
I've always been a hard worker, and actually when I started my banking career as a teller, I was also going to college. And so I went to school at night and worked as a teller during the day. And I did so well in that role that I achieved all my sales goals and actually won awards, which led me to getting promoted into the banker role.
Perfect.
Yeah. Oh, is that good?
I don't want it to go on, but you see that's only the second try.
Okay.
And it already helped you transition.
Okay.
So again, that builds that cadence. I hope our listeners, viewers, get that concept. You don't get it. It takes practice. You got to go through it a few times. And I did have someone literally wasn't really getting it, and it took I don't want to inflate your ego here, Kristin, but they took so many more times than you. But finally, they were like, oh my God, I got it. They were so excited.
It does feel good. Even though I got it on number 2, it feels really good when you actually are like, oh, okay, it clicked. Awesome.
Yeah. So that's transition words. And that's what I teach in the program. And that's what you get to see on the live coaching session that's in the course.
Yes. Okay. And we have to do something real quick here, because we've talked about this a few times on previous episodes, but the presumptive close. You and I definitely have different levels of boldness on the presumptive close. So something I would be comfortable with is, here's one I wrote down here. If selected, when is a reasonable date to start? And then I know you're more along the lines of, are there any concerns with the value I can bring to the company? If so, let's talk about them.
I have to be honest with you. I've never used that one. I got that from someone else, and I have heard people say that the interview panel loved it. Yeah. But I don't think I would use that. But what you're saying, an assumptive close, you do say, is there anything that we've discussed here that would give you any hesitancy that I could answer. That's probably the way I would say it instead of
I like
would
that.
give you any hesitancy about hiring me. But I do think you should have a couple of questions. I think you should have that assumptive close, asking if I'm selected for this position, will I be able to give my current employer at least 2 weeks notice? Something like that.
That looks good.
That shows that you're confident, you're positive. Or you say, am I going to get a relocation package for when? No.
I'm like, are you serious right now?
We could go on and on with humor. There are some things on the assumptive close.
Yeah.
Like,
when do my health benefits start?
In closing, I have a great sense of humor. That's why I blew this interview. I could have aced it.
No, I think that's great. All right. I want to run through just a few at the end because I thought these were kind of funny. Out of your 50 most common interview questions, for laughs, I pulled out the 5 that the number 1 is the one that is my least favorite. When I'm asked, I swear every single time I've been in an interview, they ask me, tell me about yourself. Why I'm not alone. Why do so many people hate that question?
Well, my God, do you want to talk about birth? Do you want to talk about that time you had your first kiss? I mean, seriously, it's one of those things. How do you put up a life in a sentence? I hate that question. I never asked that question as an interviewer.
Yeah, I didn't either. You have here, and I would love to know what you think. I have struggled with this in an interview before. What would you consider to be your weaknesses? And it's like, I don't want to be TMI here, give them too much information, but you have to give them something.
Yeah, Kristin, I'm glad you brought that up because people struggle with that more than anything, their strengths and weaknesses. I've had that a lot. Here's the key. It's okay to be honest. You should be honest, but what you want to do is always put a positive spin on it. For example, and this is true, I've used this in an interview. I'm not naturally organized, but I've put systems in place to help keep me on track, and I continue to improve in that regard.
Oh, that is literally me. That's my weakness is organization. So that one, I'm stealing that.
Yeah.
I think that's great. All right. We have one here. Why were you fired? One, who just goes out and tells someone they were fired? Because I don't believe it's even legally acceptable to give that information out if you're an employer.
I think that particular question might be more of a mom and pop type thing. It was on the list.
Tell me why you were fired.
Yeah, I did. By the way, I did not originate this list. I got this off of a trusted source, the internet. But go ahead.
Yes. Well, I like them. So I pulled them out.
I did add a few. Don't get me wrong. I changed a few around, but I would not have added, why were you fired? Why are you such a loser?
Notice I said it with a southern accent. I don't know why I did that. Sorry, Ron. No
Rubbing
offense
off
there.
on you.
Why were you fired? Tell me. What do you like least about your job? That's a tough one, too. We talked a lot about not bad talking your existing manager or company.
It's so funny you pulled that out. When I saw that a long time ago, I said, if I interview again, I'm going to use that one because you want to talk about how people think, their psychology of their approach to work. Like that speaks a lot right there. What do you least like about your job? Now, I want to tell our listeners, it's okay to plug in a little bit of humor. If you keep it short and sweet, you could literally say, well, I have to stay here all day is one issue, but you've got to smile, when you say that. Or you could literally say, I have to get up early in the morning, or I have to drive to work. It's okay occasionally. You don't want to do that every question, but that one is a golden opportunity to lighten the mood. And but that's difficult. And again, I would say, this is probably my least favorite, but I don't mind it, or it doesn't cause me problems or something. Put a positive spin on it.
But if someone's doing a joke, right, saying something humorous, they do need to follow up with a serious answer, though, right?
Yeah, no, they do, but it shows, as you and I, if people listen to, is humor still a thing? And we literally saw where people who exercise humor are they're more likable, they're more likely to be promoted. So what you're showing them is, I have a personality. You guys will enjoy having me here, that I'm not a robot. So you got to be cautious, but there are those little openings. And another thing, Kristin, that we're not going to go into is I think about every 3 or 4 answers should be a story. You turn it into a story, because as they say, it's not always what you know, it's how you make them feel. And because everyone comes in may have similar, backgrounds and education, but you made them feel good. You told them a story. You drew them in. And ironically, Kristin, before I knew you, but I used a banking story in the interview course.
Yeah,
Sure
okay.
did.
Right. Last one. How many tennis balls can you fit into a limousine?
Yeah, I like that one.
What's your answer, Ron?
Well, I'd give a definitive answer. I would say 400,025.
Oh, my goodness.
That question came up years and years ago. And I heard someone say, they answered, I have no idea. And they said, well, guess. And I realized that maybe there is something telling about that, because if you say 5 million, they may realize, that the way you perceive things might be a little tainted or might be off.
Right.
Or it may even be a knowledge and skills assessment that, you just are way off. You say 15 tennis balls. They're like, wow, this person may have an issue. So I would be ready for that. I mean, I think people should read these, all of them, and just have a general idea of what you'd want to put in. So, by the way, Kristin, how many tennis balls are in a limousine?
So my daughter plays tennis, and I've purchased for her probably 20 tennis balls, and so I know how little space they take up. So I would say you would need 10 to 15,000 to fill up the space of a limousine.
Well, this is how I would tell people to answer that. And I think you may be close. We may need to Google that. But what I would say is, I don't know how many tennis balls are in a limousine, but I'll be in one soon.
Nice. Oh, my goodness. I like it. Hey, that's a good way to get the attention off of the actual answer.
No kidding.
All right.
Oh, as always.
That's all we had. We had a lot. That's a lot right there.
As always.
We told you what to avoid at all cost, ways to land your dream job. And also, Ron, can you provide the website again so they can go get the free interview course for the next week?
Absolutely. Go to Forward Operations and just scroll down. You'll see a great picture of Kristin on there. By the way, I just want everyone to know this. We've got different employees. I've got people coming on board. Kristin, you go to her page. When you click on her picture, it's way better than everybody else's. So I had someone literally last week, and I forgot to tell you this, Kristin, looked at yours and said, wow, can Palmetto Media make me look this good? I said, no, but we'll do what we can. So you've raised the bar on that.
All right.
Anyway,
I appreciate it.
People can go to the website, click it, and it's going to be free for 7 days. And it's kind of a reward.
The number 4,
Number 4.
WARD.
Yes, operations.com.
There you go.
And we want you to peruse the website anyway, but go down to interview skills to land your dream job, and it's free. It's our appreciation for all the support we get, people listening to the podcast, people watching on YouTube. It's tremendous, and Chris and I are very grateful.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in. You know where to find us on social. You know where to listen to us. Make sure to share it out. And go take that interview course.
Yes.
You have nothing to lose and everything to gain.
Yep. Be the leader you're meant to be.
We'll see you next week.
The Dirty Side of Leadership podcast is brought to you by Forward Operations. If you'd like to book Ron or Kristin for speaking events, training, or executive coaching, visit forwardoperations.com. Be the leader you're meant to be.